we're going to watch TV. And there's two videos. One's a short one. The other one's kind of like a town hall setting. And we are going to talk about electromedicine and going to continue down this path of nerve stimulation. And I'm a little taken aback right now. Twofold. One, every time I watch one of these Salty videos where she's singing, it's something special. Number two, the last 30 minutes, I've been looking at this document here, and I'll share this document with you before we move on to the next document, or the next thing we're going to talk about. And what this document is, this is a document from the Air Force, and it talks about nanotechnology, cyborg cell, molecular nanoscale circuits for active control of cells. And this is work that was done by Mr. Lieber in addition to another group. They worked in tandem. Final report was in 2018. It was a 3-year project, so 2015 through something, right here, September 2015 through September 2018. And I'm reading through this document, and they're literally talking about being able to remotely activate cells and being able to dope this nanotech, these little nanorods, right? Complex structures, be able to dope them with different materials and medications, and then selectively deliver them and have them infuse into cells. Of interest to me here is infusing them into neurons, being able to remotely fire and remotely measure neurons. And they also talk about specific ways of delivering this stuff. And they talk about an adenovirus and then specifically HIV, to be able to link HIV, dope HIV onto these pieces of nanotech so that they can deliver them into cells. They utilize viruses and liposomes and other things that cells naturally use or acknowledge and understand. And they allow this nanotech to be absorbed into the cell, and it becomes part of a cell. This is a transistor, field effect transistor at the nanoscale that allows for directional voltage. Measurement techniques. This is insertion into a cell. This is you see the little triangle here. And after 16 minutes, they say that it was implanted. And this is the red parts of the cell. And this is the insertion of a transistor into a cell. And nonetheless, I'm not done reading this where I'm reading every word, but nonetheless, it's very disturbing. The Air Force funded this stuff, and this is the kind of stuff that I think was given over to China, guys. And when you look at COVID, for example, and it being a chimeric virus that utilizes HIV as one of the chimeric attachments, it just makes you wonder just exactly what's going on. Because once we all get COVID, even if we don't have symptoms, we're going to have that software, so to speak, in our bodies. And when you start looking at things like this, where they can dope nanotech and selectively isolate and target different components inside of our biology, the sky's the limit with self-assembly with this stuff. So I'm a little taken aback, and nonetheless, we're gonna watch about a little bit about electromedicine. You'll see why. Maybe after we watch a little bit about electromedicine, why kind of these pieces sort of fit together a little bit. If you look at them individually, they may not make sense, but as a whole, they end up making very good sense. So you're watching Big Tech, and the idea behind the show is to try to understand and unpack what the biologic internet looks like. And then in addition to that, how does the biologic internet ultimately, how is it going to be connected to the internet as we understand it? We are on episode 62. And for those of you that aren't on YouTube, congratulations. And you can go to patriotsoapbox.com, go to the Big Tech Show tab or Show link. If you go to the menu or the 3 horizontal buttons, you will find a banner that looks like this. It says Big Tech Biologic Internet Gateways. Underneath the category that says Read, Watch, Think for Yourself, you will get a link that takes you to all of the archive notes so far. And we're at 62. So it starts from 1, goes up to 62. The shows are archived up to episode 51 until YouTube started dinking around with the archive channel at Patriot Soapbox. So as time goes on, I will make my own videos and house them in various places so that we try to mitigate censorship. But for now, stay tuned, because here we go. You can find these videos that we're going to watch on YouTube, but I've linked them through a website that I'm making, humaninternet.org. And we're going to watch 2 of these today. I encourage you to go here. The site's under construction, but you're going to find all kinds of interesting stuff here that may or may not be of interest to you. So, bioelectronics.
The Center for Bioelectronic Medicine is a group of world-class researchers and state-of-the-art facilities that are combining expertise in biology and technology to treat a wide variety of conditions and diseases.
Many diseases are treated with very powerful drugs that have side effects. And in some cases, like Parkinson's disease, other drugs are added to those drugs to treat the side effects of the original drug, and it can be very difficult. Bioelectronic devices can be implanted once and then programmed to work all day long for many, many years.
So we're going to go through the 30-second pause thing. What you're seeing here is a very small implant that's attached to a vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve runs throughout the body. It's the main nerve. There's many other nerves, but this is when I say the main nerve, it's a primary focus for groups like the National Institute of Health and DARPA and others to stimulate and regulate biological functions the way that medicine does, what we understand as medicine, but doing it with electricity or light or other energetic forms of therapy. So here we go.
Patients don't have to remember to take their medications. And many of these devices will have minimal or no side effects.
We are on the cusp of treating new diseases in new ways that would not have been imagined even 5 years ago.
We started the pivotal early trials in bioelectronic medicine going after diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, and even lethal shock. And the early clinical trials have been extremely promising.
So they're far along with this. There's a reason why Google acquired Fitbit. There's a reason why GlaxoSmithKline and others lobby as heavily as they do. There's a reason why. There's a reason why a lot of the stuff that we're seeing right now is happening. We are truly going through a transformation. Physical, emotional, spiritual, and it all ties together. And through this transformation, it's my contention to show that the power structure, the establishment, if you will, is attempting to use this period of time as an opportunity to fuse technology with humans in such a way that we turn into a slave class or a serf class, rather than utilize this stuff to empower people and to help those that aren't naturally or normally the way that we should be.
There are patients who have been treated with bioelectronic medical devices today who are in remission and are living nearly normal lives and are not taking medications.
In the Center for Bioelectronic Medicine, we're not only looking at inflammatory conditions, we're also looking at ways to treat diabetes, cardiac disease, spinal cord and brain injury, and we hope to even develop new ways to treat cancer.
We are in a position to create new devices to treat diseases in entirely new ways. One example of that is the neural tourniquet. This is a device that has the ability to stimulate a nerve through the skin and control bleeding.
a device stimulating a nerve through the skin. So something like a wearable, something like a Band-Aid, there are patents for that. We'll look at those as time goes on. We looked at earphones and the various fabrication mechanisms of those, particularly Apple and Beats by Dre the other night. We'll go back to the Apple Watch, and we'll look at other stimulation devices applied to the skin as well as invasively, like what you see here on the screen.
Has very significant impacts for patients who undergo surgery, for anybody who sustains a traumatic injury, whether that's in the civilian world or for our soldiers on the battlefield.
Creating the new Center for Bioelectronic Medicine is really another example of Northwell encouraging innovation at all levels.
Bioelectronic medicine is a brand new field, and Northwell's leadership gives us the opportunity to build a new center, create a new future, and cure diseases.
So, next.
Imagine a future where disease is treated without the use of drugs, eliminating expensive pharmaceuticals and their potential side effects. Imagine a future where illness can be treated with a small implantable device, a device that can cure you with simple electrical signals. It's not science fiction. The future is closer than you think. In fact, it already exists in the world of research. Dr. Kevin Tracy is at the forefront of this new age of medicine, leading the charge in a field known as bioelectronic medicine.
So this guy gave a talk at DARPA. I was going to show the DARPA talk, but a lot of it is very specifically oriented towards one of his first major research breakthroughs. It's kind of dry. So through the course of looking at this guy, I found these other videos that seemed a little more appropriate for just to get the general idea across. Here we go.
And Dr. Tracy's most recent discovery has the potential to revolutionize medicine as we know it. Dr. Tracy has developed a way to treat a range of diseases impacting the immune system by implanting a small device on a patient's nerve. The nerve is then stimulating, telling the human body to make natural chemicals needed to treat an illness. The device is a targeted treatment, eliminating the need to take drugs.
So I want to show you that this tiny device here is modulating this very same nerve that can be accessed in the ear. It's really that simple, folks. And to take it one step further, these nerves can be accessed wirelessly. And to go back to the nanotech document I showed you a little earlier, all that does is allow for greater precision, because that nanotech can theoretically be applied and inserted into these nerve cells. They can be inserted into the organs, which then tie into the nerves. So you use the organs to actually stimulate the nerves, which then connect to the brain. So there's a variety of ways to do this without actually having to go have surgery to get this little device put into your neck. So what we're seeing here publicly as a complete package, what looks like modern, innovative, the next best thing, they are leaps and bounds ahead of what we're seeing here, in my opinion.
Patients are also spared harmful side effects and reoccurring costs that normally come with pharmaceutical treatments. Recent clinical trials using bioelectronic devices have been completed in Europe, successfully treating patients suffering from rheumatoid arthritis, offering them, and many other patients, hope.
The nervous system is nature's information superhighway. It controls end organ function by modulating activities such as molecular release and muscle tone. Over the last 300 years, our understanding of the nervous system has grown immensely, yet our ability to influence it and treat disease remains limited.
Neuromodulation, folks. Neuromodulation does not necessarily limit the modulation to the brain. What it's talking about is modulating neurons. So you could say that it's modulating the nervous system, whether it be the central nervous system, the brain is a part of that, spinal cord in the brain, or the peripheral nervous system, which is everything else. Neuromodulation encapsulates all of that.
Devices that harness electrical impulses to modulate muscle tone and neurotransmission do currently exist, But leaving aside the complexity of the brain, we believe that recent technological advances provide us with a way to achieve precision neuromodulation in the peripheral nervous system. Within peripheral nerves, we plan to selectively target bundles of axons with an entity that can read and write the signaling patterns passing through these fibers. These devices will treat disease at the point of the end organ.
So they just said that they're going to be able to target specific nerve bundles, the axons and the nerve bundles, to treat and modulate disease. And the Air Force document I showed you talked about particularly targeting neurons to be able to control the firing of neurons. It's more or less the same thing, whether it's in the brain or in the nerves. Because once you understand the code, the software code, if you will, the way a nerve or an organ talks to the brain, then you can then directly talk to the brain. It's no different than learning French, Spanish, English, Chinese, Persian. Farsi, I think, is the right way to say Persian. Anyway.
In the longer term, we want to read and write the action potentials that travel in each of these individual axons. To achieve this specificity, we will attach the device to the nerve bundle in question. The device itself could be electrical, perhaps taking the form of conductive polymers, wires, or nanotubes.
Just keep in mind, we've covered quite a bit where they can selectively target what location they want something to go to in the body. And we just looked at nanotech that's able to get inside of a single cell. And this is many, 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 many cells that you're looking at here. So what you're seeing here is a visual representation of the concept. So just understand that the specificity can be much, much more detailed than an entire bundle. It could be down to a single cell.
These could be inserted into the fascicles to trigger the activity of specific axons. Or it could be optical, involving fluorescent nanoreporters. Alternatively, these micro-devices could be electromagnetic or ultrasonic in nature, wrapping around the fascicle, reading action potentials, and writing code.
So here you go. Reading and writing directly into your nervous system. And what we're seeing here is something that's implanted. But again, remember, we went over the earphones in detail, and what they're talking about is vagus nerve stimulation in particular, with the previous video that we watched. Here is a more general sense where it could be any peripheral nerve or any organ. The vagus nerve is the largest information highway out of the brain, basically, besides the spinal cord, right? Obviously. And you can get to that just by putting something on the skin of the ear. So when you think about a wearable device, since we haven't gotten into the wireless and the electromagnetic at distance stuff yet, when you think about a wearable device, think about a ring, think about a watch, think about a headphone, and the fact that it has electrodes and antennas on it that can do things like transmit electric fields, magnetic fields, or both through your body and interface with your nervous system.
Through such precision, we believe these bioelectronic medicines will not only be a new avenue for treating disease, but they will have greater therapeutic benefit and fewer side effects. So imagine a day when bioelectronic medicines sit alongside existing therapies, treating disease through the peripheral nervous system. They could be harnessed to target the nerves that control the constriction of airways in asthma, for example. Or they could change the firing pattern in the nerves to the gut, treating inflammatory bowel disease, diabetes, or obesity. Bioelectronic medicines may help fight cancer by modulating the firing pattern of the nerves to tumors, or resolve problems in bladder or pancreatic function. By targeting nerves to the ovaries, these medicines may be able to treat infertility. The list of opportunities goes on. But to make this a reality, collaboration between all disciplines is essential. Biologists, engineers, material scientists, neurosurgeons, research funders, and others need to work together if we are to make a medicine that speaks the electrical language of the body. To help the people we know and love do more, feel better, and live longer.
Glaxo. So, for the rest of the show, we're going to watch this one. And it's a town hall type environment. It's just people talking on screen. I urge you to pay attention as much as you can. It was very enlightening.
First of all, what a turnout. I have no delusions about it. It's like having, the 70s was like having All in the Family as the lead into you, having that session, that amazing session before this. So I'm glad that you've stayed. I suppose that all of you, or most of you know, but I have to officially say, from my CBS feed here, the Supreme Court marriage is a fundamental right for gay couples, ruled this morning, 5-4.
Yeah, so this was a little while ago. This was back, I think, during the Obama years. I don't exactly remember. It's not in a mode that I can reference off the top of my head, or at least reference through the screen. So if you want to find out, you can look this up yourself, but it was a few years ago that this was recorded.
For those of you who don't know, so just your normal, typical 24-hour news cycle. Tony Fauci is over here. We mentioned on Face the Nation, the fabulous Tony Fauci was on with me, I think, every single time I was on Face the Nation. And we're very lucky to have him, straight shooter in the audience, who's been astounding for this country during the Ebola crisis, the AIDS epidemic, and everything else. So
I hope you all heard that. Anyway, Mr. Fauci, criminal.
It's an honor to be here with him. This is a fascinating subject for me. About 2,000 years ago, scientists in Rome and in Greece figured out that if you took an electrical eel and you put it across the head of somebody who had a migraine, or if you put the electric eel in a foot bath for people who had pain in their feet and poor circulation, that it actually helped. I have a feeling that the circulation thing may have been that they jumped out and they were running around, and just in running around, the blood flow increased. But this is an example of an observation without understanding any kind of underlying science, and I think back then it was sort of the equivalent of kicking a television set. If you're old enough to when we used to kick the television set, you go like that, and sometimes.
All right, so there's been knowledge of electricity influencing the human, right, the human organism for a number of centuries at this point. So it's been on the minds of those that know for a very, very long time. Material science has finally caught up, along with computers and software and machine learning and all of that.
Sometimes it was better and sometimes it was worse. But what you're going to hear about today is mind-blowing to me. It is a brand new, it is going to be the first second, I think. Of course, you've been working on it for 20 years, but the first second, I think, publicly to in any kind of a big way of hearing about a whole new approach, a whole new science, a whole new way of thinking about therapy and even perhaps diagnostics. I've also learned from previous panels that I am going to go ahead and read the introduction of each of the three panelists, just in case you haven't done so.
This gets going. Don't worry. It is important to hear what these gentlemen have done and where they currently stand. as dry as it is, it's important, and you'll see why.
Quickly, Kevin Tracy is president of the Feinstein Institute for Medical Research and president and professor of the El Mezzi, did I pronounce that right? Graduate School of Molecular Medicine, a neurosurgeon by training. He's credited with discovering how the brain controls the immune system's response to threat. He received the DeWitt Stetton Lectureship in 2007 from National Institute of Health and co-chaired the first International Scientific Congress addressing the inflammatory reflex. Remember that term, folks? You heard it here first, and you're going to hear a lot more about it. I had not heard about it until about a month ago. He's at...
Yeah. You see why DARPA likes this guy? Why the National Institute of Health likes this guy? Very smart guy. Very smart guy.
Editor-in-Chief of Molecular Medicine and advisory editor of the Journal of Experimental Medicine. His book, Fatal Sequence, The Killer Within, recounts the hospital course of a young patient with sepsis who changed his life. I'm going to move to the right. Moncef Slaoui is chairman of GlaxoSmithKline Vaccines.
Moncef Slaoui, GlaxoSmithKline, chairman, vaccines. So these are high rollers, folks, high rollers.
He's a member of GSK's corporate executive team and board of directors. He oversees GSK's venture capital arm, SR1, and other VC partnerships, as well as its bioelectronic R&D strategy. He was previously the company's chairman of research and development, led the franchise commercial operation, and engineered the development of a vaccine pipeline for GSK Biologicals. Formerly an immunology professor at University of Mons, Belgium, Slaoui has authored more than 100 scientific papers and presentations. His board service includes Pharma Foundation, Qatar Foundation, National Institutes of Health Advisory Committee to the Director, and Biotechnology Industry Organization. And finally, but
I don't remember most of that, but what I do remember is GlaxoSmithKline, vaccines, R&D, bioelectronics, published over 100 papers, not from this country, sits very high up on a board that has a powerful lobby. Anyway.
Certainly not least, we are really honored to have Francis Collins here. He's a director of the National Institutes, is the director, not only a director, but the director. I think I made Tony Fauci the director the other day by mistake in one of my reports. Is director of the National Institutes of Health, a physician geneticist noted for his discoveries of disease genes. He led the International Human Genome Project. For those of you who don't know it, he led the International Human Genome Project, and that's going to be very relevant to our discussion today, which culminated with the completion of a finished sequence of the human DNA instruction book in 2003. Francis, how much did you say it cost for the first one to be sequenced?
About $400 million.
And now?
It's about 2,000.
Okay, so to put some context around this, damn, number one. Number two, I watched another YouTube video with Peter Diamandis, who said that it's going to it does now currently roughly only cost $100, not $2,000. So to sequence somebody's entire genome beyond 23andMe, I'm talking a complete and total sequence, not a partial like 23andMe or whatever else. A complete sequence is now $100. Think about how much money is being thrown around with this COVID testing crap, folks. What's $100 a person to get all of their genetic information during a time like this? Globally, if you have systems that are retail $100 a piece, if you were to do it in bulk, I bet that goes way, way down. But I'm digressing. Let's continue.
Not bad.
Amazing. Collins was director of the NIH National Human Genome Research Institute from 1993 to 2008. Prior to NIH, he was a Howard Hughes Medical Institute investigator at University of Michigan. He is an elected member of the Institute of Medicine and National Academy of Sciences, was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2007, and received the National Medal of Science in 2009. So we've got some heavy hitters. If we can't learn something today, then we're doing something really wrong. So So I'm going to start off. You're going to give a sort of an introduction, sort of a 5-minute brain dump to sort of bring you up to speed. And what we had a conversation a week or two ago talking about how we would do this. And I think the best thing is to just assume that everybody, although there may be scientists, tabula rasa, blank slate, and start off with sort of a primer of, what are we talking about today?
Making drugs.
Yeah, so that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about using the body to make drugs. Talking about using energy rather than chemicals to replace drugs, to modulate the body, modulate the body's functions, manipulate the body's functions from disease to thought.
A new way. So 120 years ago, Paul Ehrlich taught the world how to make drugs. He said you begin by finding a drug target and you screen molecules to find what he called magic bullets. In the last 120 years, the pharmaceutical industry has been doing it that way ever since. Find the molecular target that is at the heart of the disease problem and find a molecule or a drug to hit the target to change the target's function and cure or ameliorate the disease. And this has been a fabulous strategy for a $1 trillion industry, and it has enabled the cure of many diseases and the amelioration of others. But they're not magic bullets.
So he's talking about chemicals. He's talking about pharmaceuticals, pharmakia. A pharmakia is still pharmakia even if it's electrical. All you're doing at that point, instead of introducing foreign chemicals, is that you're modulating the body to create its own chemicals on demand. And when you start tying in genetic manipulation, at what point can you start introducing genetic code into the body, which then produces novel types of chemicals that would otherwise not be possible had that genetic information not been introduced in the first place. So when we look at electroceuticals and electromedicine, that's one piece. The other piece is then subsequently adding DNA, adding RNA, adding genetic information into the body, which then allows for the electrical or energy-based stimulation to potentially create novel or new types of chemicals, because that's how the body communicates. We are electrochemical creatures.
And they have side effects. And so despite the precision with which pharmaceutical approaches today and molecular biology approaches today can make highly precise molecules, at the end of the day, you take a precise molecule and you swallow it, or you inject it, and it goes everywhere. And you can have off-target side effects or metabolic side effects of the metabolism of these drugs. And so in thinking about this as a neurosurgeon who studied inflammation for 30 years, my colleagues and I came up with an alternative approach, which is to use the body's own nervous system to make the drugs.
And there it is. Use the body's own nervous system to make the drugs. Because that's innately how the body communicates anyway. So, from his mouth to your ears.
And in this model, one thinks of a cell or a molecular target and thinks of a way, rather than finding a molecule to control that target, you find a neurotransmitter mechanism or a neuroscience mechanism to control that target. We don't think about it much, but every cell in your body is close to a nerve ending. And those nerve endings have the power to change and manipulate how those cells and those molecular targets function.
Can you just say what a neurotransmitter is?
A neurotransmitter is the chemical released at the end of the nerve near the cell. So the electricity, the action potentials travel down the nerve and dump the neurotransmitter next to the cell that you want to treat, or the cell that's under control.
So that's, in a nutshell, he's lining out, in a general sense, the way the biologic internet works. Electrical signals go up and down the wires in the body, aka the nerves, the nervous system. And when it gets to where it needs to go, those signals are converted into chemicals that are then understood by the adjacent structures or cells. And that's how we work, folks, in a general sense.
So my colleagues and I, as the first effort to enable this idea, chose a molecule called TNF. TNF is a drug target you see advertised every Sunday afternoon if you watch football or golf. It's the molecule that Phil Mickelson talks about. It's a $50 billion drug target, 5% of the world pharmaceutical industry and growing. And so we mapped a nerve circuit that starts from the brainstem, crosses the nerves of your neck, down to your abdomen, into your spleen, and followed a path where action potentials go along these nerves and end in the spleen, where the neurotransmitter, the first neurotransmitter, is norepinephrine, is released in the spleen, which activates a specific T cell to make a second neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which floats along and bumps into the cells that make the TNF and turns them off.
And let me
Yeah, so just know that they've mapped out if this, then that. If this, then that, and then when that, if this, then that. And then if that, if this, then that. Meaning it's not necessarily one and done. Think of it as something like pinball or something like a chain reaction, I guess. I know there's analogies that are out there that are physical manifestations of a chain reaction. But it's like pool. That'd be a good example. Like pool. Hit the cue ball, it hits another ball, that ball hits another ball, or it bounces off a wall, hits another ball. All of these things are being studied and mapped. Completely mapped down with as much precision as possible. And off we go.
Let me just stop here. So TNF stands for tissue
Tumor necrosis
tumor necrosis factor, and it's inflammatory.
It's a powerful molecule that drives inflammation. So today, people take TNF inhibitors for rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory bowel disease. So with this idea, my colleagues and I, a company I co-founded called SetPoint, did a clinical trial in Europe, and we implanted a nerve stimulator in the neck of patients. We implanted a large one, but coming down the path, they'll be like this, the size of the fish oil capsule some of you swallowed this morning, hopefully. And this sits in the neck on the nerve to drive the signal that turns off the TNF. And
All right, so if that device can be implanted under the skin and provide enough energy to the nerve, is that device larger or smaller than something like a smartwatch? Larger or smaller than something like earphones? Larger or smaller than something like the hardware in something like a cell phone that you would put next to your body, next to your skin, nearby? And if those energy currents are so small and so subtle, could focused electromagnetic fields from a distance, like your cell phone or a Wi-Fi router or a cell tower or even a satellite, could those potentially do the same things if focused and modulated in the right way? And if you say no to the last, I urge you to keep an open mind, because I will share with you a patent that discusses being able to resonate organs and being able to resonate things like DNA with electromagnetic energy without contact. Just bear in mind the form factor of that thing. Very, very, very small. Basically like the first part of your digit where the first joint is, right? So pick a finger and like down to the first bend in your finger, the first joint. That's about it. Everything is inside that thing, which means it gets its power wirelessly, which means it has electrodes or some other stimulator mechanism in there. It's got complex electronics inside there, integrated circuitry, so that it runs properly with the right voltages, the right modulation techniques in general. And a form factor is something similar to down to the first bend in pick a finger.
we put some people in remission. The lay press has picked up on this, the New York Times and others, and it's getting very exciting in the last year. The scientific paper is being reviewed now. There are some scientists here. If one of you is reviewing the paper, I'll buy you lunch. I'll buy you drinks, whatever you need. See me after this. We hope that this will be a big scientific report coming out in the next few months. The opportunity is not some sort of future jets and cars flying around thing. It's now. The opportunity is now. And what we need to do is map these circuits, because it's a scalable and extendable approach. Pick your target, find your nerve, then make your device.
So you just said it. This is way back, way back. So map, target, provide therapy. And the NIH actually has ongoing programs. I think they expired in 2019. No, 2022 or 2023. One of those two. I might be mixing videos. Nonetheless, they have millions and millions of dollars going towards exactly that, mapping the nervous system, all of it.
And this approach to bioelectronic medicine is a big idea that's going to change the world.
Great. And before going on to Moncef, I just want to say that to remind those of you who aren't scientists, most of the drugs that we have now are poisons. They work by blocking a receptor, by blocking a channel, by stopping something that normally happens from happening. This is different. This is making something that's normally in your body fire and giving it a bissel more. So, Moncef, why don't you?
Thank you. Can I just make a slight correction? Most of the drugs that we have today could have side effects, but they have allowed us to take our average living time from about 40 years, 120 years ago, to about 82 or 83 years today. So they have been very important. They will continue to be very important.
So, yeah. Obviously sales pitch, and then here's a guy who's one of the heads of GlaxoSmithKline who makes all of their money off pharmaceuticals going, hey, wait a minute, that's the majority of our business right now. So obviously he's making statements that conflict with what the host just said. To a point, he's right. I mean, life extension, when you look at the longevity of life now versus 200 years ago, 300 years ago, whatever, you could say it's improved, but maybe. I think that's a matter of perspective.
I was head of R&D for a very large corporation with 16,000 scientists working, and for many years our scientists were not able to discover enough new medicines to keep this company going. And I was charged by the board of the company to turn this around. And 5-6 years in that process, having had the first glimpses that things may be working, my question became not so much what is going to happen for the next 10 years in this company, but what is the longer-term sustainability of being able to discover new therapeutic interventions to allow people to live longer and have a better health. And clearly, for instance, the genetic breakthroughs that Francis has led are allowing today the discovery of a whole series of new medicines that have the advantages we know and some of the disadvantages they have described. So we wanted to think beyond the way we discover medicines today. The way medicines today work is based on three-dimensional structure. You take a target, which is a protein in our body that has a particular shape, and we spend years discovering a chemical structure or biological structure that we hope only fits that particular protein and no other protein. And indeed, in most cases, they fit mostly that protein, but they also touch other proteins, and sometimes there are side effects.
So there's a couple things going on here. Yeah, Lawrence, I saw you there. I think you were the one. Yeah, I agree with you. Just keep watching the show, buddy. Lawrence said that in chat that they don't think, or he doesn't think that they need any implanted hardware. They would just use EMF fields and the like? And the short answer, in my opinion, Lawrence, is yes. But in order to illustrate that with some meaning behind it, we go through this exercise where we look at what's commercially available and what's being discussed by the people who are in these industries in order to understand the concepts and the ideas, and then start looking at selective technologies that we can then bridge that gap. Because that is the underlying goal, Lawrence. That is the underlying goal, is to illustrate to as many folks as possible that the devices we carry, the networks we're building, literally will make or break our civilization. They will provide us a renaissance, or they will provide us chains. Either way they're coming. These systems are coming online. They already are online. They're just going to be saturated into the marketplace, and we will pay for it. What are we paying for? Are we paying for a renaissance for our children? Are we paying for chains? So long term, that's where the show's going. No contact interface, illustrated in a variety of ways. But we have to go through this in order to demonstrate that this is where the money and the technology and the research and the focus is, so that when we get to those more complex ideas, we have a baseline of understanding collectively. Thanks for mentioning that.
But one of the critical points with the drugs as they are today is that we have to flood our body in them and hope they will only touch the target we designed them for. They are not local. We have to rely on the patient's ability to comply with taking the medicine every day, 3 times a day, 5 times a day, or every week. And we take them all the time because we don't know enough when we need them and when we don't need them, when we have a chronic medicine. So we started to think, can we invent something completely different? And indeed, we realized completely independently that there's another platform that our body uses to engage its biology, which is electrical signals that are traveling through our nerves. So the concept of, in fact, hijacking this language that exists in our biology, and not only the language, but actually the conduit of the language, which is the nerve, and now taking the nerve and helping the nerve write a different language, a different message to the organ they're controlling. All our organs, which are mostly involved in our chronic diseases, are controlled by peripheral nerves. And so we thought, let's go.
Can you just define what?
So there it is. Hijack, rewrite, new information. All our organs are controlled by nerves. It's a two-way street. That means the organs talk to the nerves, which talk to the brain. The brain talks to the nerves, which talk to the organs. The nerves are just a superhighway. That's like the fiber optic connections that we use for the internet out here. It's like the wireless connections that we use for the internet out here. The twisted pair, the coax, the power lines, the satellites, the cell towers, any which way you can envision sending and receiving communications. That is what nerves in the body do. They send signals to and fro, cell to cell, organ to organ, brain to body. That is what they're talking about here. They are framing it such that it's being presented that these nerves are going to be treated or used for treatment of chronic organ dysfunction, chronic disease, but that is just a fraction of what it can do. That is the framework through which the funding is provided from organizations like DARPA, National Institute of Health, National Science Foundation, and on and on and on and on.
Peripheral nervous as opposed to the central nervous?
Certain central nervous system is in our brain, highly integrated, extraordinarily complex. Peripheral nerves are stemming from the brain through various proceeds and go, for instance, through the vagus nerve that you have described, and then branch into organs more and more specifically. And our concept is to understand, read the electrical language that nerves, just as they come to the spleen or to the muscle of controlling our lungs or into the pancreas or into our GI tract, get to that nerve, read what they're telling our organ, and if we read that something is wrong, correct it. And do that through microchips or nanochips that we would implant on that nerve, have them very local, so they need to be very close to the organ, and very specific by definition because they're very local, but also because they only correct when they read something is wrong.
Microchips or nanochips provide electrical corrections when needed, and only provide the corrections when it's read, when the improper signaling is understood. So you have closed loop systems, just like we were looking at with DARPA, being able to read and write with a microchip or a nanochip. And that document I showed you earlier on in this show, the Air Force document that Dr. Lieber participated in working on nanotech, that's what they were doing. They were looking at nanotech and the various compositions to be able to modulate and to read cellular functions, be able to understand membrane voltage potentials and other types. If you look in Lieber's patents, they understand changes in chemical composition and on and on and on with the nanotech, because the nanotech can then talk to a radio, talk to a wireless signal. So here we go.
They would be temporally specific, and there would be no compliance issue because they would be there with the patients all the time. We elected then to, how would we go about that? We scouted the world actually for a year during 2011 and found that incredible progress was made in the various scientific disciplines that are required to make this happen. Material sciences, because when you implant something in your body rejects it all the time. How are we going to find materials that can survive for years or decades? Powering a structure like that, how would you harvest power and put it together? Power is not very friendly to biology and to life. How can we understand which nerves go where and what part of an organ do they control? These were all questions that we realized were actually all very important. The scientific disciplines that are studying them are making tremendous progress, but nobody is integrating these sciences to put them together in a nanochip and make them effective.
So yes, they are. Dr. Lieber is, the Air Force is, DARPA is, MIT is, China is, because they just take away all of our intellectual property through various sophisticated ways, mechanisms, methodologies. I love telecommunications. I love Huawei, ZTE, Cisco, which is just a European-based method. You have Sienna, which is Canadian-based. You have Cisco's, which are European-based. You have Flashwaves, Fujitsu's. That's Japanese, the Fujitsu's. ZTE, and Huawei. Notice I didn't say made in the USA. And that, folks, is what's installed in our infrastructure, in our telecommunications infrastructure, that companies like AT&T use for major transportation pipelines, and what companies like AT&T use for their handoffs to the NSA taps. And when I say NSA taps, I'm talking strategic locations where the network bottlenecks, so they can get many, many, many cities worth of information out of very, very few fibers because of the way that the fiber networks run throughout the country. And they exist on the coastlines as well when they go undersea, because that's where traffic goes in and out of the country in a land-based network topology. And we're now talking about bioelectronics that are going to be networked and connected to the internet, that are going to be inside of our loved ones, voluntarily or involuntarily, with infrastructure that is owned by everybody but the United States, that have back doors that send information or allow a two-way communication to our loved ones. Notice I didn't say made in the USA, folks.
In making this bioelectronic medicine. So we decided to actually foster this scientific field, become the integrator, create an open innovation approach. We created a prize. We put hundreds of scientists from all continents together in a meeting. Francis, you were there, and you were there too, Kevin, and really tried to advance this field. We have opened this completely, so intellectual property, etc., is the property of the world and of the scientific field. And enormous progress has been made over the past year and a half since we had that meeting. I can tell you that today in GlaxoSmithKline we decided that these medicines, these therapeutic interventions, will be a reality. I can't tell you when, probably in the next 5 to 10 years. They will be a reality. I can tell you how often they will be used. There are some challenges that we still have to fix, but they will treat chronic disorders. We have demonstrations in many, many animal models I'll be happy to share. We have also advanced I call it the hardware, the engineering of the nano chips and all the powering issues, etc.
Notice he keeps talking about nanochips, folks. Nanochips means that they can go through syringes. Nanochips means they can go through your skin. Nanochips means they can be inhaled, they can be absorbed, they can be ingested. Nanochips. Power harvesting with nanochips. All it takes is the right alloy, the right composition, and they will convert things like sound waves or heat or chemical changes or fluid movement. They will convert those into other forms of energy like electricity. They will convert those into other forms of energy like light. They will convert those into other forms of energy like sound at the nanoscale based on the composition of the nanotechnology. We're talking about nanotech that function as transducers that use physics principles in the quantum realm, the quantum mechanical realm. They use quantum physics to do these types of things at the nanoscale. And AT&T has programs that literally have a heading like cybernetics, and they have a partnership with MIT. Sabrina Dunkar, who's the ambassador between MIT and AT&T for their cybernetics program. And she deals with nano electronic chips that go inside of cells. And she's got her own lab and her own little science team at MIT. So guys like this that you see on the screen here, GlaxoSmithKline, yet they would be having the meetings with folks like whoever's at MIT. We've looked at Ed Boyden. We've looked at Polina Anikiva. We will look at Deblina Sankar again. I highlighted her briefly before. But that's who these people wine and dine, folks, because that's their R&D, are these Ivy League universities.
And I'll close this by saying, in front of this optimism where now we decided to invest to go into clinical trials and clinical proof of concept, there are also challenges. And I'll cite a few of them. The first one is actually powering these devices. Power creates heat. When you store power, it's hot. When it's hot, it's not good for biology. How are we going to find out how to power these devices? There are amazing technologies I'll be happy to talk about. Mm-hmm. The second issue is actually to understand the atlas of how our organs are innervated. And we were extremely happy to see that the NIH decided to create a funding grant that Francis will be describing to you, I'm sure, in his discussion, to help map where fibers of our neurons go and what potentially they do. And then the third area is actually how we connect to a nerve. everything inside our body moves all the time. So when you connect something metallic or hard to a nerve and the nerve moves, you run the risk of potentially harming that nerve. How are we going to make these connections last for decades and years? Again, fascinating. Technology is being advanced. Those are three of the critical challenges this technology is, but as I said, we're very optimistic they will work.
Great, thanks.
So, yeah, this is it's the future of medicine, folks. Gemstone, I'm going to try. I want to learn a little bit about it myself. But the way I'm going to try to understand quantum mechanics is through understanding the quantum internet and a little bit about how quantum works at the nanoscale with the nanotech, such as Lieber's nanotech, and some of the other things I've seen from MIT. So I think as time goes on, from a layman's perspective, I think our group here will have a better understanding of quantum. But it's going to definitely have a slant as it relates to the communications piece, because ultimately what we're doing at this point as humans is we're building nano networks that talk to the internet. And these nano networks are now a blend between biologic nano networks, meaning cellular, chemical, and electrical communications at those scales, a nanoscale. And then you have the synthetic nanotech, which is the kind of the stuff that Lieber and others are into. So that's where my research is going to go.
Well, it's great to be here in Aspen and a privilege to be on the panel with Munson and Kevin and to have John, who seems to be afflicted by something, as our capable moderators.
It's hyperreactive airway syndrome. I think you all know it. The bugs are dead. It's just an allergic reaction to their carcasses.
Okay. With the appropriate bioelectronic medicine, you can probably control that. You just haven't
by the end of this, people may want to just be zapping me. This time I will cover this.
So it's actually interesting that you raised the Human Genome Project as a potential connection here, because I think we are at a juncture here for this whole concept of bioelectronic medicines that sort of has the flavor where we have a lot of preliminary data, a lot of opportunity, but a lot of interesting technology that has to be pursued if we're really going to see this come into fruition. And I can't help but reflect upon the fact that 15 years ago, to the day, to the minute, I was standing next to Bill Clinton as the draft of the Human Genome was being announced in the East Room of the White House. That was June 26, 2000. Kind of ironic, and all of a sudden, here we are. But I think the potential here, while it is enormous, still deserves a great deal of hard work to sort through what is, at the present time, unfortunately, largely phenomenological, because we don't understand the details of how it all works. We know there's some pretty dramatic things that can happen. I mean, Kevin talked about his interventions for rheumatoid arthritis. How many physicians are there here in the audience? I'm curious.
So we'll stop for a minute. Yeah, we'll get to quantum. I see you out there, Dave, and we'll get to quantum. I think we'll as a group have some really interesting things come across in chat when we start dealing with quantum. We could probably spend a few months on that, looking at some quantum videos that discuss Schrodinger and double slit and all of these other components that kind of provide some framework around it. That's what we need to learn. Ultimately, I think that's what should be taught in high school, because that's where the new innovation is going to come from. It's going to come from the young, who are able to dream the stuff of dreams and then manifest it as they gain knowledge. And if we don't teach it early enough, then they're already boxed in before they have a chance. So here we go.
Well, quite a bunch. Okay, so I'm an internist. One of the most sort of satisfying and dramatic moments you have as a doc working in the emergency room, which I used to do a lot of, is when somebody rolls in the emergency room door who is faint, lightheaded, and has a very rapid pulse. And it turns out they have something called paroxysmal atrial tachycardia, a rapid form of heartbeat that's not terribly dangerous. It's not like VTAC. but it is very uncomfortable if you're in the middle of it. And it is possible, if all goes well for you, that you have that person simply lie down on the gurney and reach in and press with just the right amount of pressure right here on the carotid artery. And within a minute, you can break that tachycardia and that person is back to a normal rhythm. And you feel like a magician. How does that work?
As long as you don't press too hard.
Don't press too hard. Yes.
Both sides.
Strokes are not a good thing to have happen under your fingers.
Gently.
But how does that happen? Well, there is something called the carotid body, which is part of this peripheral nervous system, which is a very important way in which your body regulates the heart rate and the blood pressure. If we had complete control of the carotid body and could dial in or out exactly the right signals for it to send, then maybe hypertension wouldn't have to be treated with drugs anymore. Maybe.
So it's a long way around of basically saying that they can modulate the nervous system in such a way to do things like fix high blood pressure, do things like correct cholesterol. Wouldn't that be nice? Have your cholesterol in check without having to take things that literally melt your brain? Because that's what cholesterol medication does, right? Cholesterol medication is designed to basically liquefy and get your body to excrete excess fat. And your brain is what, 70% fat? Something like that. A large percentage of your brain is fat. So you start taking cholesterol meds for a long period of time and you literally start melting your brain.
Maybe it could be treated by this bioelectric approach. People have looked into that. We clearly don't know enough about how to do that safely and effectively, but that's just one of the things that we're all imagining might come out of this effort. Now, the problem is that in the carotid body and in the rest of the peripheral nervous system, our descriptions of exactly what's going on there are pretty rudimentary. If you go to Wikipedia, which I just did for fun of it, and looked up the vagus nerve. So what's the vagus nerve? Vagus nerve is one of the cranial nerves, comes out of the brain. It's cranial nerve number 10. And it is probably the big daddy here when it comes to what we're talking about today, because it carries a lot of this parasympathetic kind of signal, the kind of thing that maybe is involved in the immune system, is involved in gastric contractility, is involved in blood pressure, and so on. The Vagus for wandering, by the way, because it wanders all over the place after it leaves the brainstem. It's got all these branches. Go to Wikipedia and look it up. All the diagrams look like they were drawn in 1920.
They were.
Because they were. Yeah. And we haven't gotten past that. We can sort of maybe say what the path of the various branches is, and it's pretty clear that they're not quite all the same in everybody, so we have a personalized medicine issue here as well. Just got to say that.
So here you go. NIH talking about mapping the nervous system, and that we have a unique signature. The way your nerves run through your body aren't identical to mine or anyone else's. So when we start applying the idea of biometrics and we start applying the idea of personalized medicine or personalized therapy, very specific modulation schemes may be needed for subtle tuning when compared one person to another. So this obviously requires a need for some sophisticated software that will enable minor details to be accounted for when delivering these types of stimulations. And that's important to note, because if they can do it with these small devices, can they do it with algorithms, AI, and software over wireless networks through other forms of stimulation? And in my opinion, the answer to that question is yes. Once you learn it with something that's attached, all it is at that point is taking those ideas and making them happen with a wireless environment. And wireless technology has been around long enough now. It doesn't necessarily have to just be electromagnetic. It can be light, it can be sound, it can be electromagnetics, electric fields, magnetic fields, or both. That stuff has been around long enough. So to translate once this stuff is figured out with something that's attached, to translate it to a wireless platform is not that far of a stretch.
But what we really need, if we're going to try to understand how to intervene, is a much more sophisticated way to measure what's going on there. And that means getting the anatomy squared away. And that is, in fact, going to require a lot of technology that we are starting to invent, but we have work to do. That vagus nerve is not a nerve. It's actually within it hundreds of thousands of individual nerves that are going to different places, some of them sending signals, some of them receiving signals. If you really wanted to understand the system, what you'd like to have is a technology, this is our dream, that you would wrap around that nerve that would actually sample everything that's going on there without interfering, that would both be able to read what's happening and also send messages to change what's happening.
It kind of sounds like Twitter or Facebook, huh? You wrap around the social media platforms, be able to read everything without destroying the ebb and the flow of the information, and then whenever they want, go in and change it. Only this guy's talking about wrapping around your nerve. Well, just imagine a bunch of pieces of nanotech, rather than it being a single nerve cuff, which is what he's describing is a nerve cuff. And we can look at one of those. We probably will shortly, maybe next show. Instead of having a nerve cuff wrap around, think about nanotech. Many, many, many pieces of nanotech can fit inside of a single cell. Having nanotech dispersed throughout your nervous system. So it creates a cuff. It doesn't necessarily even have to be a cuff all in one spot. Think of it being stretched and spiraled around your nerve, through the nerve, going from head to toe. The different layers within that nerve, picking up the signals, and all of those pieces being addressable. Lieber's patents actually discuss being able to address the nanotech so that you can specifically locate and stimulate one piece of nanotech versus another. Networking the human body, networking the nervous system.
And do that for the individual, because there are going to be differences you might want to have to tune. That's going to take an incredible advance in nanotechnology to be able to do that. But there are engineers and neuroscientists that are champing at the bit to get there. So I give Kevin and Moncef a lot of credit for getting the idea of this bioelectronic medicines initiative together, and Moncef putting resources from a private company into this effort and then insisting that everything has to be open access. That doesn't happen all the time, and I think should be very much applauded. And we did, in fact, at that meeting a year and a half ago, conclude that it's time to really make a push here, and this is a place where NIH can make a contribution. We have something called the Common Fund, which is a part of our budget, which is intended to tackle projects that no single part of our institution could handle, but it might benefit across the board quite widely, and this seemed like a great example of that. So we have initiated a program called SPARC. It's not the greatest acronym, S-P-A-R-C. You can get the electricity feeling here, but when you find out what it stands for, it's a bit of a stretch. It's stimulating peripheral activity to relieve conditions.
SPARC. That's the NIH's version of what DARPA is doing with their electroceutical research. SPARC.
S-P-A-R-C. I'm sorry, it's the best we could do. We're government people, you know, give us a break.
Francis, I don't have the vaguest idea how you came up with that.
Oh, that was not good. The Vegas idea. Did you get that little cute?
If you have to explain the joke,
yeah, let's stop with that right now. So, I got to say, our colleagues in DARPA are also engaged in this, the Department of Defense. They're very interested in the same people that brought you the internet and, you know, things like GPS have also glommed onto this. They have a better acronym. Theirs is called ELECTRIX, E-L-E-C-T. SPTRX. Get it? I wish I'd thought of that one first. But what are we doing with Spark? Well, we have actually dedicated, over the next 7 years, $248 million. And the first notice of opportunity for applications went out. They were due in April. They're getting reviewed next month. And we will make awards in September of the first set of these, particularly focused on defining the microanatomy of the peripheral nervous system. So we have.
So the first order of business from the NIH in the Spark program, perhaps even through the general fund, is to map the microanatomy of the peripheral nervous system. Tax dollars at work, folks. Tax dollars at work.
Have a full census of what's there, some idea of what it does, at a much more detailed nature than what we can read about from the 1920s, and we're still kind of stuck with that. So where will this go? I don't know what the timetable will be, but I do think everybody else on this panel is right. We're going to end up with interventions for obesity, for diabetes, for lung disease, certainly for the immune system, for bladder problems, for pain, and for hypertension and cardiac issues, and probably some others that people here on this panel could mention. But how that will work, it's only going to get there if we collectively put a lot of effort into it and bring a lot of experts of various disciplines together, which will be a lot of fun. That's how the Genome Project worked. That's how this is going to work too.
So if that's how we function, folks, then everything about us can be accessed. Everything about us can be assessed. Everything about us could potentially be manipulated or modulated. When you think about what we are, what are we? We are complex mechanical biologic organisms with a consciousness inside. The consciousness is restrained here. And in this complex biologic organism, it has to have a communications network in order to function all of the parts and pieces the way that we do, which is really elegant, the way a human functions. Look at an athlete, you look at an MMA fighter, you look at a dancer, you look at an artist, and humans are very elegant, beautiful creatures. None of that would be possible without a complex communication network. And that's what your tax dollars have been going towards for the last roughly decade, a lot of them, is to unlock the subtle nuances that decode and unpack the complex biological meat suit that is the avatar that your consciousness drives.
There are so many exciting things about this. I don't even know where to go, but I will just start by saying it's not just about mapping the anatomy of where these nerves come. So if you consider them like roads and highways and little, streets that come off it, it's figuring out where the crossing lights are, where the flashing lights are. Mm-hmm. How do you get off a highway? How do nerves communicate with each other? How do they handshake? What's the electrical way that they handshake? What are the other ways that they can handshake? So the challenges are enormous. I don't want to go much farther without sort of mentioning it's not just that this is a pipe dream. There are some specific examples of people who have been helped. Maybe the person who had rheumatoid arthritis in Europe, can you talk about that person?
So the first patient was implanted Labor Day 2011, and I flew to meet him over Thanksgiving weekend in 2011. He was a 45-year-old guy in Bosnia. And there's a picture of me and him and his doctor and nurse, and I'm clearly the happiest guy in the picture. And I don't know if it's because we're all in Bosnia and I get to go home, or if it's because we were able to see a guy who was 45 years old and had been in his couch and unable to leave his living room for 5 or 8 years from rheumatoid arthritis, pain in his hands, pain in his feet, unable to button his shirt, and he had exhausted the drugs available in Bosnia, which was basically methotrexate and NSAIDs.
So, another country to do human trials. So it is what it is. To some extent, I think the right to try concept that President Trump is enabled, I think is a very good thing. It keeps a lot of these opportunities in-house, and it allows our country a greater deal of transparency and oversight that I think stops some of the subterfuge that comes along with these programs. Because what you're seeing here would be what's on the surface. And I'm not saying that there's something that happened behind this particular incident. What I'm saying is that if these mechanisms are in place to develop technologies in the United States and then try them out on people other places around the world, and that's considered acceptable behavior, that doesn't bode well with me, considering the track record so far. And we can talk all night long about the things they've done to people here in the United States. Experimenting on humans, I mean. Who knows what's being done in other countries?
And within 2 weeks of implanting the device in this man, he was up and around playing with his kids and playing ping pong. Within a month, he felt so good he went out and played tennis, which was a disaster because he had been lying on his couch for 8 years and was completely deconditioned, and he hurt his knee. And he was in an arthritis trial, and they count joint pain, so his score got worse. So his doctors had to tell him, take it easy until the trial's done. And that was now coming up on several years ago. He's in complete remission. He's driving a truck. He is playing with his kids, and it's been amazing to see. And there's another patient in Amsterdam who was identified by the New York Times who actually failed 5 biologics. And so the opportunities are happening now, and it really is exciting to see.
And also, I just want to emphasize how hard it is to get a drug now to specifically go to one area. There are so few examples of where it works amazingly. I guess, radioactive iodine for somebody who has thyroid cancer, because the iodide gets taken up by the thyroid cell, so even if there's metastatic disease, it goes right to it and then it blows up the cell. It's very rare to find an example like that, and this is the opportunity to get a little more specificity. Francis, I just want to start off, and I want to leave, it's 25 of, I want to talk for 5 more minutes just amongst ourselves, and then open it up, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions. But I feel, without too much hyperbole, this must be similar to the beginning of the Human Genome Project, where you have this moonshot sort of, possibilities in front of you, but as you said, the degrees of freedom are huge, and so how do you focus? When you came home after you first sort of got this and you were talking to your family, what were you saying? You come home and you go, you cannot believe what's going to, and then what followed that?
Well, of course, scientists also have to be very careful about not overestimating what the consequences might be, or
So I just ask myself, how far ahead are they when they offer these open, candid discussions that they know are going to ultimately be reported on and or recorded and then put on platforms like YouTube? What are they really working on? How far along are they? Because what this really is this is the PR rollout, public relations rollout, to get the public accustomed to these ideas, because they're ready to ramp. They're ready to start scaling for market. And it's just one of the things I think about when I watch these things. Just wonder how sophisticated this stuff really is.
Underestimating the challenges. And in this situation, I think we have enormous opportunity, but we do have a long way to go. It has the same feel as when we started the Genome Project, thinking where it might go, and we still don't know the end of that story. It's developing all the time. Come to my session at 5 o'clock today, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. It has the same kind of feel, perhaps, as what's happening in cancer right now, using genomics to be able to understand in an individual tumor exactly what's driving those good cells to go bad, and how could you get a targeted therapeutic, again, targeting, that goes straight to the heart of the problem in that tumor and doesn't bother the normal cells. These are all the kinds of things that technology is allowing us to think about that a few years ago were outside our reach. This one has a particularly interesting feel because of the way it brings together neuroscience and drug therapy, which I think have had their connections, but this is a different kind of a connection.
Yeah. Bringing together drugs and neuroscience. So we're going to, at some point, look at the non-lethal Bradford, I think it's the Bradford's Research Institute. And back in the early 2000s, they were discussing using chemicals, pharmaceuticals like SSRIs, as non-lethal. They were categorized as non-lethal weapons for pacification. And when you start thinking about fusing the idea of pharmaceuticals with electroceuticals, electromedicine, sky's the limit. Sky is the limit. It also makes you wonder about the wind-up toys, which takes you back to my original contemplation. When they're rolling this stuff out, how much further advanced are they? If this is public discussion, you better believe the military, DARPA, black budget programs have already looked at this stuff and likely already perfected it and likely already using it for covert warfare. Doesn't that just seem reasonable? Plausible? I mean, it's just how it's done, folks. It's just how it's done. The public does not get the cutting edge stuff. The public gets the stuff that the intelligence agencies have a better version of or no longer have a use for, or becomes standardized to such an extent that if the platform itself is deployed, it provides the covert operations mechanisms that machine, it provides them with additional tools and resources because it lays out an entirely new platform to operate on, where you don't have just standalone ideas, standalone implementations. You could take the cell network, for example, and what that did to expand the intelligence collection capabilities. Before the cell network, what did you have? You had the electrical grid, and you had mail, and you had the land-based telephone, and you had humans talking face-to-face or eavesdropping. But once the internet came onto play, now that opened up the entire thing. Prior to the internet being available to the public, the military had it for their own communications. So the point of all that is this. This stuff's coming out online now. Where's the covert piece at? The stuff that, we don't get to see. How far along are they? What are they doing?
And it also has this wonderful feeling of uncovering something that has kind of been a backwater in terms of our understanding of the human body and our focus on medical research, the so-called autonomic nervous system, sort of like one of those things you learn about in medical school, and then it's just this muddy thing, and you didn't enjoy learning about it very much because it was muddy and you want to work on something else. Well, now its time has come.
And Monsef, we were talking last week about the unusual collaborations that are happening here between business, the NIH, scientists. Can you talk a little bit about
Yes, I think,
that?
I mean, what's been fascinating is to see putting together somebody who had a lab working on material sciences that were involved in how to improve devices that work in car engines, sports car engines, somebody that was working on powering devices that are designed for spying because they need to be so small, they need to harvest energy from the environment. Amazingly, they harvest energy from the movement of water that's in the air. It's called piezoelectronic, and somebody who was working on creating tattoos on bodies that are themselves a microchip or a nanochip that can help you measure many of your body activity, like potentially some of the technologies used in some of the current smart watches, and put them together towards an objective that they never thought would happen, and that is now their common objective. And see how within, frankly, a year and a half, there's been tremendous progress. One of the most impressive outcome I have seen is, and this is in rats, so it's not in humans yet, it's curing infertility in female rats that have a particular condition, inflammatory condition in their ovaries, by stimulating the nerve that goes into their ovaries. And going from...
So there you go. When the guy just said it, that they used in spycraft, they needed devices so small in spycraft that they would harvest energy out of the water in the air. Now, I've never heard of that before till I heard this guy say it. But he has. Oh, he's only a VP for the R&D department for GlaxoSmithKline, you know, the place that the government would go to and say, hey, can you throw a little money at this and see what you come up with? Can you go to your contacts at MIT and Harvard and Purdue and the Feinstein Institute, the Vanderbilt Institute and others, Georgia Tech, and ask them what they know about this? You know, lobby, kind of a revolving door kind of a thing where these people would go through government and have access to these kinds of programs so they would know what to look for, know what to develop when they lobby in their round circular door back out into the public sector to go sit on boards like this guy does? Spycraft. But wait. If it's not on YouTube, maybe it doesn't exist.
Infertile animals that do not have their menstrual cycle, etc., to animals that have a menstrual cycle and have puppies, as compared to those that did not have the electrical impulses in the neuron. To me, that was extremely impressive because it is such a holistic set of events that need to take place before you become pregnant and successfully achieve a pregnancy, and to be able to correct something which frankly we don't understand. We have no idea how it works, except by impacting that nerve that has changed. And it was quite complex to impact the nerve in rats for a long enough period of time for them to correct the effects, some of the challenges. So fascinating to put a lot of scientists together, doing things that they didn't think they would be doing, creating a lot of energy and creativity in the system, and hopefully human disease will be eliminated, or at least human health will be improved.
And as long as Dr. Collins was pointing to his gizmo that was measuring something, whatever that is, I don't want to give a plug for any particular
yeah, I should be careful not. I'm a federal employee. If I advocate for a product, I'll lose my job. But basically, we're all walking around, I suspect, with some of these wearable sensors, or many of us are, which keep track of your body's performance, the environmental exposures. This is a very significant development as well in terms of how we can maintain health, how we can manage chronic illness. It all kind of fits together, this coming together of electronics, of bioengineering, of tissue engineering, of neuroscience, of what we understand about the body in lots of other ways. About the brain, we have a big initiative about the central nervous system, which is not our topic this morning, which is at least as bold, trying to figure out how those 86 billion neurons in here do what they do and what we could do to intervene when they're not performing in the way you want them.
And it's a little amuse.
So hopefully we'll have time. I'll I'll find the freer logic patent that discusses being able to inject neurocode into the nervous system at the wrist in order to provide somebody else's thoughts into the brain of the individual who is wearing the watch. And in that same patent, it discusses being able to use transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is magnetic pulses emanating from the watch, in order to extract the brainwaves from somebody at distance. So we'll speed this along, and just remember that this guy, the NIH, said it's a fusion of electronics and synthetic biology and tissue engineering and genetics and everything else. It's all sort of coalescing together. And just remember that damn watch.
Bush for Precision Medicine when you came to CBS a couple of months ago, and we were talking about, you've got this human genome project, we know what people's genomes are, now you got to match it up to phenotype, so what's going on in their lives, and these gizmos and maybe this technology can help us have databases, I know that's a scary word, databases of health, which help us put it all together and figure out, what's going to happen to who, what should we do when. But of course, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the topic that I'm sure all of you are thinking right now, which is you're hearing about chips implanted in bodies. So I've got to ask you, Kevin, and then we'll flip it to the audience. Any possibility of people hacking into other people's neurological systems and causing mischief? Not that anybody has that type of mentality in our planet.
So devices can be hacked. And that is one of the challenges that Monsef and I have talked about. And Francis, this is an opportunity to think about if we were to roll some of these out today, going to the doctor will become a thing of the past. Your chip will talk to your watch will talk to the internet will talk to your doctor will make adjustments.
But Kevin,
that's happening.
You know what they can't do? Your watch can't do this.
I'm not trying to put you out of work. I'm just telling you what's happening.
No, your watch can't do this.
Correct.
Your watch can't look in the person's eyes, and your watch doesn't have the hairs on the back of its neck that stand up. And even though intuition is a horrible word in this day of precision medicine, I am quite certain it will never be replaced by machines. But I love machines. I'm a computer nerd and all that, but I can't let that go by. Go ahead.
I think the question on the table, when you think of it in that way, is do we need a new internet? The internet, as designed by DARPA, is a completely open network. Yeah. And I think the discussion that's happening, not just in the guise of medical devices that can be hacked, but in other technologies that people know a lot more about than I do, but should we be building a completely secure internet from the ground up?
Yeah, I'm going to just hashtag 5G. So anything related to telehealth and telemedicine is being touted as being possible over these 5G networks. And these 5G networks are going to be just as public and just as open, at least to us, as the current networks are. So now we kind of sort of see a coalescing of reasons why perhaps we don't want Huawei, and why perhaps the infrastructure that currently exists throughout the United States, consisting of backhaul pieces of architecture. What I mean by that are the switches that fill up the offices that are responsible for providing communications to entire cities, are made by companies who have allegiances to other countries besides the United States. Europe, China, Canada, Japan. Because what these people are talking about is putting things in your body or in some way connecting your body to the internet. And obviously there are privacy concerns. So hashtag 5G.
You know what Scott Pelley said to me about a month ago? He said, has the internet become one of those just neighborhoods that is so dangerous you can't go there anymore? And I just, whoa, that is really an interesting thought. And when the thought and people are talking about building other networks. But anyway, with that, we'll open it up to the audience. I'm sure there are questions. Go ahead. Do we have a mic or do you need a mic? Oh, we'll implant a chip. Hold on.
So I'm a current medical researcher that's about to go to medical school. And this is awesome because I'm trying to figure out what to do, and I'm in pediatric neurology, and it's a really cool concept. And I love this whole integration of smart watches and chips. But going to the past into Eastern medicine, do you guys take lessons from acupuncturists and millennia of insights on nerves and all these crossings of where to focus, research on where to put these chips?
So, yes. It's fascinating to see how potentially acupuncture has mapped points of action that may be relating to exactly the nerve signals we're impacting. And just to bring it to today's age, I will not cite who, but just yesterday I was spending time with a major meditation guru, and who has a whole set of hypotheses of the impact of meditation and your breathing, rhythm, etc., on the vagus nerve, and entering into metabolomics and RNA sequence analysis, etc., to document in a more scientific way the impact of meditation on how it impacts your health.
So, acupuncture, nervous system, meridians, chi, energy flow. Stuff has been known for centuries, millennia. And material science is now catching up to be able to make these types of possibilities permanent, on demand, potentially controlled by someone or something else.
So I do think this is an area where very old medicine and ultra new specialized medicine may meet somewhere.
It could really give it a jump start. All these thousands of years of observation, you'd be foolish to ignore it.
Absolutely.
NIH has a whole section, a whole center called the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health that has been doing these kinds of rigorous analyses of acupuncture, of other kinds of interventions, and particularly focused now on meditation and its benefits, which you can clearly show are there, but we don't understand how that works. So yeah, maybe there is a way to pull some of that together and to understand why it works when it does and why it doesn't when it doesn't.
A few years ago, I met with the Dalai Lama. Sounds like an opening to a joke. A guy walks into a bar. This is a true story.
Hello,
And I went up to his compound in near Woodstock, New York, and spent a couple days. And at the end, it was a meeting like this, and I was on the stage with Liz Blackburn, and we were summarizing 2 days of scientific presentations that had been made to him. And he asked me through an interpreter, he said, this vagus nerve, where is it? I said, well, it runs down the neck, across your chest, and into your abdomen. And he goes, is it in the front or the back? And I said, it's in the front. And he said, is there one or two? I said, there's two. So afterwards, everyone's going around and leaving, and a monk comes up to me in long orange robe, striking, and says to me, do you know why His Holiness was asking that? I said, no, I have no idea. And he said, well, there's an ancient Indo-Tibetan meditative practice where the practitioner envisions a cloud of blue energy over their head, and then they channel it into two channels down their neck, across their chest, into their head.
So there's the end of that. So let's go find the smartwatch that can read your thoughts. So here it is, dual EEG, no contact monitor. And here's the actual patent so that you can see it on the screen. US 201800081145A1 by Freer Logic. Guy used to work for NASA, now is dabbling around in Silicon Valley. So dual EEG no contact monitor. And what you see here is this idea of synthetic telepathy over the internet, whereby the thoughts are sent through the nervous system into the watch, converted into a digital form, sent over the internet or Wi-Fi, and then received by the other individual wearing a watch, and then translated into neural code that runs through the nervous system into the brain, and the brain interprets it as thought. So we can search for inject, and let's see if we can find. So here it is. It says here, the unique combination of two devices, a body-based EEG acquisition and no contact EEG acquisition embedded into a single wearable device. So what does this mean? A body-based EEG acquisition, something with electrodes that is able to read the electrical activity on your skin or your nerves. And then the no contact, non-contact EEG acquisition embedded in a single wearable device. And that, folks, is a coil that is capable of sending out transcranial magnetic pulses that are able to read your brain waves. Electromagnetic sensor coil and an external sensor array. So when you think of a sensor, the sensors on your Apple Watch that are sensing your biological functions to know what your heart rate is, to know if you're stressed, to know whatever. Those sensors can be used to inject neural code into your nervous system to then interface with your brain. And in this patent, it discusses being able to transfer thoughts, someone else's thoughts. And it can extract, in this patent, at least it says collect, with an electromagnetic sensor coil, which is just a fancy way of saying a pancake coil or a planar coil or something like that, which are available in just about every modern device these days. It's known as wireless charging. Just to say of one example, they also use coils to drive the speakers in small devices like a watch. They also use coils as antennas so that they can use the coils as a variable antenna for wireless connectivity to things like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and cell networks. And when you think of a small form factor like a watch, like an Apple Watch, that coil would need to perform many different functions. Otherwise, you'd be wearing a literal brick on your wrist. But I digress. So a body-based EEG, the electrodes, the no-contact EEG, which is the antenna, embedded in a single wearable device, creates a totally new paradigm of use, namely wirelessly transferring thought between two separate persons, also known as mind reader technology. EEG technology is embedded in this disclosure, can provide the basis for thought transfer over distances using simple personal wearable devices by transmitting EEG waveforms using digital signal processing and algorithmic transformations of the EEG data and other data, including but not limited to heart rate, via wireless technology such as, but not limited to, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, infrared, internet, or other wired and wireless technologies, decoding this information as thought to an electrostimulator and passing the thought to the brain of a wearer of the device through, but not limited to, a single or multi-channel electromagnetic sensor array or electromagnetic coil connected to the peripheral nervous system. This can be the foundation for thought transfer or mind reader technology that allows thoughts to be shared without vocalization or physical connection to another human being. The no-contact aspect of the apparatus may be used at distance, such as 6 inches or more, from the body and obtain EEG signals through material such as hair or clothing, thus making it practical to use. It does not require signal injection into a subject to obtain EEG data. However, aspects of the disclosure may require signal injection into the body of the wearer to transmit thoughts of a second person to the brain of the person wearing the device. And it also says the receiver device, the person wearing it, the receiver device, then uses digital signal processing to re-encode the digitized information, meaning it's been sent over the internet. It's at the device that the wearer is wearing. The information as a neural message, right? It's decoded and re-encoded as a neural message that is then injected into the person's peripheral nervous system by methods of, but not limited to, transcranial magnetic stimulation of the visual areas in the occipital cortex, that's your brain, indirectly modulating activity through rapid changing magnetic fields, electrically, or I should say electrically, via an array of sensors nearby the skin, or haptically by stimulating the nerves that induce neural activity that can interpret the signals such as hello. These methods can also be used in combination as neurostimulation methods to exchange information between brains directly in neural code. And this is in a watch, folks. All that transcranial magnetic stimulation you see on the internet, where it's these giant coils and you got to go to a doctor's office and there's no way, it's way too much power. Yeah, no, you don't need that much power. You need picofarads or nanofarads or microfarads worth of energy to be able to induce an alternating magnetic field into the brain, in particular, in this instance, the occipital cortex, which then indirectly modulates the neural activity of the brain to communicate a neural message, which enables synthetic telepathy. You want to talk about covert communications? These are technologies that intelligence agencies would use, special operations would use, NASA would use, Secret Service would use. And the fact that it's publicly patented at this point, again, my mind goes, what do they really have? What do they really have? And from what I've been able to find, they have patents out that discuss remote communication via satellite with no contact. Apparatus and a method for remotely monitoring and altering brainwaves back in 1974. Communication system including brainwave analysis and or use of brain activity. This is back in 1998. This one talks about being able to modulate whether or not you're hungry, whether or not you're stressed. Actually manipulating your emotions. Method of detecting human microwave electromagnetic brain activity using the same frequency bands that we use for cellular communications and Bluetooth and home Wi-Fi. 1.5 to 5 gigahertz. Electromagnetic wave sensing and modulating of neural activities, 2015. Radio frequency electromagnetic waves, methods of neural modulation using radio frequency electromagnetic waves. Same waves can be used to detect, image, and monitor a person's breathing and heart rate. Here's one for eliminating the fighting strength of an opponent using an electromagnetic wave, where they send out an electromagnetic wave and it dumps sleep hormone into your system, so it literally causes temporary paralysis. And they can monitor all of that because that will change your heart rate. That will change the way that your lungs work. And it talks about that in this patent right here. So when we look at something like this in a form factor, that's a watch. And you got companies like Google buying up Fitbit and Apple that has their watch and headphones that have electrodes all over it. And everything having antennas and being connected to the internet, it makes you wonder just what Fourth Amendment privacy actually looks like these days. What does spying look like these days?